Science is everywhere. In your Netflix queue, your chiropractor's office, the weather outside, and even in your own personality. Today, we're bringing you 5 student-produced deep dives from our Frontiers of Science seminar's very best. Stick around and enjoy.
Chiropractors are my kind of people.
Chiropractic has some of the most successes, yet some of the most failures out of all treatments for physical relief. But it's really unknown if it's an effective treatment. So in today's episode, we're going to delve into the claim that chiropractic is an effective treatment for physical relief. So does anyone know anything about chiropractic at all?
Yeah, so chiropractic has been one of the most up-and-coming trends on TikTok and Instagram, mainly for its cracks and pops and ASMR sounds.
So have you actually seen anyone do it or know anyone that has done it?
Yeah, so a 2024 New York Times article interviewed one of these famous influencers named Mr. Tubio. He claims that his treatments help chronically pain patients have temporary relief. And there is some evidence to back this up. A paper from 2015 found that it can help with upper body conditions like neck and shoulder pain.
Well, besides that one paper from 2015, does anyone have any other scientific data to back up the effectiveness of chiropractic?
Yeah, although I haven't seen anything about chiropractic on social media, I did read an article from Spine Journal that was made in 2013 about chiropractic treatment. And so what they did was they compared 2 groups that both had neck pain, but one received a real chiropractic treatment and one received a placebo treatment.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by placebo treatment?
So basically, in the placebo treatment, they didn't receive any real treatment at all. They didn't receive the actual chiropractic treatment, more of something to mimic that, what it would kind of look like, but not actually doing anything. And so what they actually found was after 2 sessions of chiropractic treatment, that the one that received the real treatment was significantly more effective than the placebo treatment. So there's a real difference between chiropractic treatment and doing nothing at all. But the problem was that it wasn't clinically significant, or in other words, it wasn't good enough for real-world use compared to things like opioids or other pain relief drugs.
Yeah, and we see that trend kind of continue once we look into chiropractic a little more. This study or survey from the Archives of Adolescent and Pediatric Medicine interviewed 90 chiropractors that work with children specifically to understand their training, treatments, practices, and beliefs. They found that many of these chiropractors reported treating children regularly with various levels of pediatric training and wide variation in their medical practices and beliefs. They came to the conclusion that chiropractic care is pretty common but not standardized.
And so is this standardization really important?
Yeah, because if we investigate one doctor or one chiropractor versus another, and we have such a variation in their practices, it's going to be difficult for researchers to define what chiropractic care is because it's so varied.
Well, does anyone have any specific cases, rather than looking at the broader scale, of people who are affected by chiropractic in maybe a negative way?
Yeah, so there is a study published on PubMed about a patient who is a 64-year-old man who sought chiropractic manipulation for his acute neck pain. And following the treatment, he developed dense hemiplegia, which is paralysis on one side of the body, which is caused by spinal epidermal hematoma, which is a collection of blood in the spinal canal that led to spinal cord compression. And so the authors of this article essentially emphasize that while spinal epidermal hematoma is a rare side effect of physical therapy, it is a neurological emergency that requires immediate recognition and surgical intervention. And they called for a greater awareness of the potential pitfalls and serious consequences that are associated with these procedures.
That's a pretty severe case. Is this pretty common? Have there been studies of larger populations of patients who've done chiropractic like this?
Yeah, actually, there was a PubMed article that looked at a larger scale of adverse impacts of chiropractic, and they found that 30 to 61% of all patients experience minor to moderate adverse effects, which means it's a very common impact of chiropractic. And this typically include various things like local pain, soreness, headaches, tiredness, and they're usually gone within a couple of days, but there often are some serious complications as well, and they found in this study over 200 cases of serious harm. The most critical risk of this is vertebral artery dissection, VAD, which can lead to a stroke or other serious negative impacts. And beyond the stroke, there's also other complications like epidural tears, which would be leakage of the spinal fluid, or spinal epidural hematomas, nerve injuries and disc herniations, or even bone fractures. So there definitely is a lot of danger to the spinal cord. But on a larger scale, the study strongly recommends that practitioners are more careful in obtaining informed consent, ensuring that patients are fully aware of the potential risks that they're going to be going through when undergoing this treatment.
Are there any specific conditions that chiropractic is generally believed to treat?
So one condition that chiropractic is very commonly used to treat is infantile colic, or basically when babies cry. And they've actually done some research on this in the past, where they took babies and either gave them chiropractic treatment or didn't, and looked at if the crying decreased over time. And so what they found was that while there was a slight decrease for the babies that did receive chiropractic treatment, it wasn't statistically significant. Although more experiments would be needed to see if chiropractic can have an impact on different conditions with infants or other specific issues.
All in all, that seems to be a through line in many of the articles and research we've looked at, that chiropractic could possibly be effective, but not enough research is done to be able to determine this.
Yeah, like for example, it does have an effect on pain management, but they only tested in 2 trials, so we really need more research to know if it works on the longer time scale and for other diseases as well.
Chiropractic is so unknown, and in its current form, it's super dangerous and uninformed to make such wide claims about its effectiveness.
Looking into the future, we need greater awareness of the potential pitfalls and consequences that are associated with procedures like chiropractic.
Picture this, you're in Hawkins, Indiana, the lights start flickering, the magnets on your fridge suddenly drop, and somewhere nearby, Dustin Henderson is staring at a compass that has completely lost its mind.
And at that point, you have 2 options. 1. Assume a portal to another dimension has opened. Or 2. Ask a slightly less dramatic question. Could physics actually do this?
Welcome to the Hawkins frequency. Today we're taking some of the weird magnetic moments from Stranger Things and asking, are they scientifically possible, or are they just really good TV?
And the answer is more interesting than a simple yes or no. Some of these scenes are rooted in real physics, like magnetic force and sensor disruption. But the show pushes those effects to a much more dramatic extreme than we would normally expect.
Let's start with the first example of Joyce Byers and her fridge magnets falling off. It's a creepy little moment because it feels so wrong. Magnets are supposed to stay put. They're not supposed to fall off like something invisible just yanked them down.
Yeah, so I think it would be helpful to look at the work of Lawrence Panic and his co-authors, which is about MRI safety. And the basic point is that magnetic force is not just some abstract science class idea. In the right setting, it can be dangerous enough to become a safety issue.
Could you explain that in a way that's a little more simple?
Yeah, so basically a strong magnetic field can physically pull on certain objects.
Think of it as an invisible tow rope. You can't see the force, but if the object responds to the magnets, the pull is still there.
And that's why MRI rooms are such a useful real-world comparison. The FDA's MRI safety guidance talks about projectile accidents and the danger of bringing magnetic objects too close. So the idea that a strong magnetic environment could affect objects around it is very real.
But the show makes it look like that kind of force is casually leaking into a random Hawkins resident's kitchen.
Exactly, and that's the exaggeration. In real life, to make magnetic objects suddenly shift like that, you would usually need an extremely strong and nearby magnetic source. Stranger Things takes a force that is real in very unusual environments and makes it seem like it can appear suddenly in an ordinary home.
Now let's talk about the flickering of lights. Because in Hawkins, once the lights start flickering, you know something weird is about to happen.
Yeah, usually interdimensional chaos.
What's interesting is that there is real science behind electronics behaving strangely. According to Stephen Lipinski and others, electromagnetic interference can affect sensitive equipment, including medical equipment in critical care settings.
Okay, that sounds important, but also kind of dense. What else can you talk about that can make that so important?
Sure, devices use signals to work. If too much outside electrical or electromagnetic noise gets in, those signals can get messed up.
It's like trying to hear your friend at a party when everyone else is yelling. Your friend is still talking, but the message gets buried in the noise.
That's why the lights in Stranger Things are actually one of the more believable things in the show. Not because a Demogorgon is literally controlling the lamps, but because electronics really can glitch when the environment around them gets disturbed.
Realistically, interference can affect real-world electronics, from hospital equipment to phones. So the scene is exaggerated, but it's definitely not random.
Exactly right. The exaggeration is in how clean and dramatic it looks. In real life, electromagnetic interference usually causes messy problems like static devices malfunctioning. In Stranger Things, the lights flicker at exactly the right moment, almost like the interference is staged.
Okay, that brings us to Dustin's compass, which is maybe my favorite example because it looks so small but it raises a huge question.
Right, because the compass is supposed to be simple. It points according to the magnetic field around it. So, if it starts spinning or pointing somewhere weird, something around it must have changed.
And, according to Desmond Lavelle and other authors of the sensor study in our sources, sensors can be disrupted by electromagnetic signals. In other words, a device can start giving misleading readings if the signal around it gets disturbed enough.
Let's allow Dustin and his friends to explain this one.
Because do you remember what can affect a compass? An electromagnetic field. Yep.
I'm sorry, I must have skipped that class.
In the presence of a stronger electromagnetic field, the needle will deflect towards that power. So either there's some super big magnet around here, or there's a gate.
Since there's obviously no gate in our world, the actual underlying idea with physics is not crazy. If the magnetic environment changes, the compass reading changes too.
But the show exaggerates how precise that effect can be. In real life, it wouldn't give you a perfect, reliable signal that points straight to a supernatural event. And it's definitely not a flawless monster detector.
So what do we actually conclude here?
I think the answer is that Stranger Things is borrowing real science, but using it in the most dramatic way possible.
So the physics isn't fake, it's just turned all the way up.
Exactly. In real life, your fridge magnets probably aren't falling because of a gateway to another dimension.
Your lights probably aren't flickering because Vecna is nearby.
And your compass probably is not detecting the upside down.
But those scenes still work so well because they take the real physics ideas and make them feel eerie.
And honestly, that's what makes the science cool. Reality doesn't have to be supernatural to be strange.
And that's it. Thanks for listening to the Hawkins Frequency.
Welcome to Reshaping Reality, the podcast where we evaluate if there is a scientific basis for all things manifestation, visualization, and affirmation. I'm Ellie.
I'm Mira.
I'm Ivy.
And we have a very special guest calling in on our podcast today. William is new to the world of self-affirmation and not totally convinced that there's any scientific evidence in favor of manifestation. So, William, tell us what you're all about.
I'm so happy you guys invited me today, and yeah, I'm not so sure about all of this manifestation stuff. You know, I like to be well-read, and when I looked at manifestation, the first thing that I found was a study that said people want to be more successful today. So to do that, they try and manifest, but when scientists looked into it and tried to make a scale to measure manifestation, all they found was that strong manifestors are more likely to see themselves as more successful and optimistic for the future. But with that, they're way more risky with their money and their decision-making, but they don't get any real benefit from any of that. And to me, that just sounds crazy, like there's no objective benefit. They're just, in my opinion, being stupid.
That's definitely an interesting study. It does seem hard to believe that these broad ideas like manifestation or zodiac signs can have concrete impacts on our lives. But if we look at the psychology behind it, there are actually some real effects. I looked at a study about whether the practices associated with astrology, like the Barnum effect and priming, drive underlying accuracy or perceived effectiveness of zodiac signs. The Barnum effect is when people tend to believe overly general personality descriptions apply specifically to them. Priming means being exposed to ideas or traits about yourself that influences your behavior without you realizing it. Researchers tested these principles on 49 college students by giving them fake zodiac descriptions and having them complete a logic puzzle.
Wait, how does that work? What do you mean fake?
Basically, some students got positive descriptions like being capable, intelligent, or smart, and others got negative ones. They found that those with positive descriptions ended up doing better on the puzzle, and those with negative descriptions did worse. But the validity didn't seem to have an effect, just the content.
So you're saying that's what astrology is?
Kind of. Basically, this article isn't supporting astrology itself, as they found that even fabricated zodiac personality descriptions, suggesting personality beliefs and expectations through priming, can change how people think about themselves and perform.
Interesting, Ivy. As you're talking a lot about positive beliefs, it makes me think about self-affirmations. Self-affirmations have a variety of benefits, including reduced stress, improved academic performance, and enhanced well-being. With this being said, there's been a limited amount of research concerning the neurological processes that are associated with self-affirmations and stress reduction.
What do you mean by neurological responses?
Neurological responses are changes in brain activity. In a study published by the Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience Journal, Researchers found that self-affirmations are effective at mitigating stress, detecting increased brain activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the anterior insula.
Whoa, that's a lot of big words. What does that even mean?
Totally. Basically, activation in these regions of the brain is significant as they regulate and relate to emotional responses, meaning self-affirming behavior has the potential to effectively mitigate your stress.
So, William, after all of these studies about priming and self-affirmation, I think there is evidence to show that manifestation does result in some neurological benefits. But it's not solely a neurological effect. Positive visualization can actually trigger physical changes in the body. The next study we'd like to bring to your attention is titled From Mental Power to Muscle Power, Gaining Strength by Using the Mind, which was published in 2004. Researchers wanted to determine if it was possible to improve muscular strength with only mental practice and no physical exercise. To accomplish this, they set up an experimental study to test finger abduction strength among 4 different groups who were studied at the end of a treatment period of 12 weeks.
Why did they test finger abduction strength?
That's a great question. Researchers found that tiny finger muscles on the non-dominant hand are not used much in day-to-day operation, making them a perfect control that's free from confounding variables.
What were the results?
The study found that the mental training group increased their finger abduction strength by 35%, the physical training group by 53%, and the control group by 0%. Therefore, while not as effective as physical training, mental training does actually increase muscular strength, even with no physical training included. So, if you ever want to skip leg day, just do some mental squats.
Wow, it seems like there are really measurable effects of manifestation that I never would have expected.
Let's close off today with some positive affirmations for you to manifest your dream life. Repeat after me. I am strong.
I am strong.
This podcast is helping me learn and grow.
This podcast is helping me learn and grow.
That was so great. I wish there was some way for me to incorporate positive affirmation into my daily schedule.
Luckily, there is. Downloading the I Am app allows you to gain access to a premium selection of daily manifestations.
If you use the code FroSci26, you can get 50% off your next in-app purchase.
Thank you so much to the I Am app for sponsoring this episode, and thank you to our listeners for taking the time today to reshape your reality.
We'll see you next time.
Are we born with our personalities, or are they shaped by our experiences? In this episode, we examine the claim that personality is shaped by both genetics and environment. Using genetic studies, twin research, and cross-cultural evidence from 62 countries, we show that personality has a biological foundation, but is also shaped by stress, relationships, and life experiences. Overall, the evidence suggests that personality is not fixed at birth, but develops through the interaction between genes and environment.
So here's the big question. If identical twins share the same exact DNA, why don't they turn out exactly the same? At first, it seems like they should. Same genes, same household, same parents, so you expect the same personality, right? But researchers tells us a much more interesting story. In the study, Why Do Identical Twins Differ in Personality, Shared Environment Reconsidered, researchers followed identical twins from childhood all the way into adulthood. What they discover flips a common assumption on its head. Even when identical twins go through the same stressful experiences like family conflict or difficult home environments, they don't necessarily come out the same. In fact, the study found that more shared stress actually leads to a greater personality differences later in life. That's surprising. You would think shared experiences would make people more similar, but here they did the exact opposite. Why? Because it's not just about what happens to us. It's about how you respond to it. One twin might become more anxious while the other one becomes more resilient. Same situation, completely different internal reaction. So even in the most controlled, same environment scenario possible, individuality still emerges. And that's what makes it so fascinating. Personality isn't just written in our DNA, and it's not just shaped by our environment. It's shaped by the unique way each of us experiences the world. Even identical beginnings don't lead to identical people.
Did you know that scientists estimate 30% to 60% of your personality is inheritable? To understand the genetic impact on personality, it is important to know the big 5 personality traits: neuroticism, which is emotional instability; extroversion, which is traits like sociability; agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness. In a 2024 study conducted by Yale researchers, 62 new loci were discovered for neuroticism, while the first ever loci was also discovered for agreeableness. This demonstrates how personality traits are influenced by many genes. An example of a specific gene variant is AGBL2, which is linked to neuroticism. In the same study, it was also found that some genes linked to personality are also associated with mental health. For example, neuroticism overlaps with anxiety and depression, while the expression of agreeableness leads to lower likelihood of experiencing these conditions. All in all, there's a genetic impact on personality and mental health that can be considered in tandem with environmental factors when studying personality.
But here's where it gets even more nuanced. A study from the Minnesota twin family study found that heritability itself isn't a fixed number. It actually shifts depending on your relationship with your parents. Researchers tracked adolescent twins and measured their personality alongside how much conflict or warmth they felt with their parents. What they found was striking. When teens felt high parental regard, genetic influences on their personality grew stronger, and their individual experiences mattered less. But in high conflict households, the genetic signal weakened, and the shared family environment started driving personality differences almost as much as genes did. Think about what that means. The same DNA can express itself very differently depending on the emotional climate you grew up in.
And this influence of environment doesn't stop at the family level. In addition, cross-cultural research provides further evidence that personality continues to develop over time. Although genetic factors may contribute to personality maturation, a study of more than 884,000 young adults from 62 countries found that, from early adulthood to middle adulthood, people tend to be more agreeable, more conscientious, and less neurotic. More importantly, personality maturation happened earlier in cultures where adult responsibilities began earlier, indicating that life experiences and social roles also play an important role in shaping personality.
So, are we born this way or are we made this way? Science answer is both. Genes may lay the groundwork, environment shapes how those traits are expressed, but personality is neither set at birth nor endlessly malleable. It shows continuity and change across a lifetime. One example of this is in a landmark study where researchers compared personality ratings that Hawaiian elementary school teachers gave their students with self-reports from those same individuals nearly 4 decades later. Some traits like extroversion and conscientiousness actually held pretty steady, but others drifted much more. What that tells us is that personality isn't something you're handed at birth. It's built slowly, and certain traits actually can show similarities to ones that you had many, many years ago. But there is ongoing friction between your genes, your experiences, and the choices you make in response to both. Who we are is partly inherited, but it is never quite finished.
Did you see the reports on that big snowstorm in Texas this winter? Temperatures below zero, ice covering the streets, and over 9 inches of snow in some towns?
Right? In Texas? And there were dozens of fatalities too. Hypothermia, people falling through the ice. It's terrible. Just goes to show there shouldn't be snow like that in Texas.
Exactly. It's freezing and people are still out here saying the planet is warming. I'd love to see what their winters look like.
I mean, have you seen Texas summers? 20, 25, and sometimes 30 days over 100 degrees.
Okay, fair, but still, if climate change is real, shouldn't everything just be getting hotter?
I guess. It makes you wonder, does colder weather disprove global warming, or does it actually prove it?
Before we can answer this, it's important to distinguish between weather and climate.
What's the difference?
When we talk about climate change, we're not talking about one cold day or one snowstorm. That would be weather, which refers to short-term atmospheric conditions like temperature, precipitation, or wind at a specific place and time. It is highly variable and can change from day to day.
In climate?
Climate averages these weather conditions over many years. It refers to long-term patterns rather than isolated events.
So a snowstorm in Texas is just a short-term event?
Exactly. Climate change refers to long-term shifts in average weather patterns, especially the rising global temperatures, driven largely by human activities like burning fossil fuels. Because climate reflects long-term trends rather than single events, a cold day does not disprove global warming.
So if a snowstorm like this doesn't disprove climate change, is it simply a coincidence, or could it actually be connected to broader climate trends?
You're on the right track. If we go back to the 2021 Texas cold snap, scientists actually studied this event to understand what caused such extreme cold. They wanted to determine whether it was driven by polar conditions, tropical influences, or another large-scale climate pattern.
Right? I heard that extreme cold events like this are linked to disruptions in the polar vortex, where Arctic air gets pushed further south than usual.
Exactly. Earlier research focused on those Arctic shifts, but more recent studies suggest it's more complex. The researchers found that the event likely resulted from a combination of natural variability, including weather patterns in the mid-latitudes and longer-term global warming trends that have been developing since the 1990s.
How do you even determine a link like that?
It involved collecting large amounts of observational climate data and running atmospheric model simulations to examine large-scale circulation patterns, sea surface temperatures, and wave activity associated with the cold event. The researchers found the warming ocean temperatures can alter atmospheric circulation patterns, shifting wind systems in ways that allow cold Arctic air to move farther south, making extreme cold events like this more likely.
So we've talked about extreme weather, but climate change doesn't just show up in big dramatic events. It's also in the air we breathe every single day.
Exactly. There was a recent nationwide study that looked at this across U.S. counties. Researchers mapped out where air pollution is highest, things like fine particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, and ozone, and compared those areas to health outcomes. And the pattern was pretty clear. Counties with higher pollution levels then lead to a lower life expectancy and higher death rates.
And not just overall deaths, right? Specific causes too.
Right. High pollution was linked to increased mortality from heart disease, respiratory illness, and even some cancers. So we're not just talking about bad air days, we're talking about long-term exposure shaping who gets sick and who doesn't.
So where you live literally affects how long you live.
In many cases, yes, and what's really important is that these pollution clusters often overlap with already vulnerable communities, which makes the health impacts even worse.
So climate change isn't just about melting ice caps or hotter summers. It's already showing up in our lungs, our hearts, and our daily lives.
That's actually kind of scary. It makes climate change feel a lot less abstract.
Yeah, and that's the bigger picture. Climate change isn't just about the planet. It's about the conditions that shape health every day. In fact, the World Health Organization has named climate change the greatest threat to human health.
How so?
Climate change is considered the greatest determinant of health because of its effect on other determinants like air quality, heat exposure, access to clean water, even the spread of disease. Not only does climate change worsen these through contaminants and increasing temperatures, but several countries lack the capacity to respond to these worsening conditions.
So we've just heard that extreme cold can still happen in a warming world, and that climate change is already hurting people through things like air pollution and other health risks. That leads to another question. If the science is so strong, why do some people still deny it?
Yeah, but the evidence is there. Why are people still unconvinced?
Well, part of the answer is that denial is not just about missing facts. It can also be about politics, identity, and the kinds of messages people keep hearing. Sociologist Jeremiah Bohr argues that climate denial is organized and strategic. Instead of only claiming climate change is fake, denial often shifts into softer arguments like, it's natural, it's exaggerated, or fixing it will cost too much.
So denial kind of adapts and changes.
Exactly, and psychology matters too. People do not process climate information like neutral fact checkers. A 2024 study on climate denial using inoculation strategies explains that people filter climate messages through prior beliefs, trust, emotions, moral values, and social context, which can make them more likely to reject scientific information when it feels threatening to their own worldview.
So it's not about the evidence, it's about how people interpret that evidence.
Right, and misinformation makes that even harder. The same study also found that climate disinformation lowered belief in climate change, reduced positive feelings towards climate action, and made people worse at telling true climate claims from false ones.
Let's recap. So cold weather does not contradict global warming. What keeps denial alive is often a mix of organized misinformation and the human tendency to trust what feels familiar, emotionally comfortable, or politically safe.
And understanding that matters because climate change is already affecting health communities and daily life.
Thank you so much for listening to Cold is Climate Change. Make sure to subscribe because every week we'll do a drawing where one listener can win a polar bear plushie.
And follow us on social media at Cold is Climate Change to stay up to date on fundraising events and future episodes.
Thanks for listening. See you next time. Love you guys.
That's 5 podcasts down. Hopefully, a few assumptions were challenged in the process, because that's what science is for. See you next time.